Good evening. I'm Jessica Layton in New York. There is breaking news tonight on the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. Let's go live now to Capitol Hill, where the Senate has just taken the first step to end the record-long government shutdown, 40 days and counting. Senators voting to pass a new bill proposed by Republicans that would fund the government through January 30th. Now, this bill still needs to go through the House, and it is not yet clear whether House Democratic leaders are on board with this deal. Now, the bill notably does not include an extension of expiring Affordable Care Act subsidies, which, as you know, was a major sticking point and still is for Democrats. Democrats instead settling for a promise that the Senate will vote on a bill for that next month, two sources telling NBC News Tonight. Let's go straight to NBC News Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles. Ryan, good evening. Let's talk about what this procedural vote means and what is in the bill, or perhaps more notably, what is not in this bill.
So this is the first step in what will be a relatively long process to finally get this bill over the finish line and then eventually get to President Trump's desk, and then the government will be back open. The Senate is a very laborious place. It takes a long time for legislation to work its way through the Senate, but essentially this was the most important hurdle. It demonstrated that there were 60 Senate Republicans and Democrats that were willing to vote yes on a package that would get the government back open. They'll go through these procedural hurdles over the next couple of days, depending on how many senators want to hold the process up. It could be wrapped up as soon as Monday. It could take until Wednesday or Thursday of next week. And then, of course, the House will have to return to Washington and vote on it as well. There's no guarantee that it will pass in the House. But given the fact that Republicans in the Senate were in favor of this, President Trump has signaled optimism as it relates to it. It would be very surprised if House Republicans didn't get on board. Now, in terms of your second question as to what is in this bill and what is not in this bill, the most important thing it does is reopen the government. It funds all government programs and agencies through the end of January. Three agencies, including military construction and agriculture, Department of Agriculture, will be funded through the full fiscal year, which would go into September. It would also fully fund the SNAP program through the end of September. And it would also claw back some of those job cuts that were handed down by the administration at the beginning of the shutdown, which was a response to the shutdown. It would guarantee those folks who lost their jobs at the beginning of the shutdown would get their jobs back. And also, every federal worker who has lost out on pay over this 41-day, what could end up being a 45 or 46-day shutdown, will get all of that back pay as a result of it. What it does not include, though, is any language related to health care at all, which was the big sticking point for Democrats. They wanted there to be some sort of reforms to health care. They had a long list of requests that they'd made, but they kind of narrowed it down to one thing in particular, and that was an extension of the premiums, tax credits that were added to the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, during the COVID pandemic. Those are set to expire at the end of the year. If those do end up expiring, which there's no vehicle right now to prevent that from happening, it could mean millions of Americans facing significant premium increases as a result of those tax credits not being in place. Now, what they got in exchange was a promise of a vote that they could even write the legislation, but there's no guarantee that whatever legislation is written by Democrats, even if it gets a vote, that it will get the 60 votes necessary, and much less would it would even see the light of day in the House of Representatives. So it's a pretty empty promise. What Democrats are hoping for, though, Jessica, is that this brings Donald Trump to the table. Republicans have been saying over and over again over the course of this shutdown, open the government first, and then we'll have a conversation about those tax credits second. It's something President Trump has been inclined to want to support, although he has said that he wants to completely reform Obamacare from stem to stern, not just deal with these premium tax credits. So I think there are a lot of people in the Democratic Party right now who view this as a cave, that Democrats did not get the policy goals that they wanted out of this, but it was clear that the pain that had been inflicted from this government shutdown for the past 40 some odd days was becoming just too much for at least 8 moderate Democrats to stomach, which is part of the reason that they hatched this deal and we're at least on the road to the government being open perhaps by the end of the week. Jessica.
Talk about that pain for a moment. You had 42 million Americans this week relying on SNAP benefits who could not buy their groceries. So there is a real concern this week that people may literally go hungry because they can't go to the grocery store. And then we saw the mayhem at the airports, especially this weekend. More than 2,400 flights canceled this weekend alone. Absolute chaos. People concerned that they might not be able to travel for Thanksgiving. They might not get to see their loved ones for the holidays. So when we talk about when this could happen, what is your best estimate on a timeline right now that we will see the government reopen, we will see those SNAP benefits come back, the airports will get back to normal, and workers will get paid again?
Yeah, so there's two different ways to answer that question. The first is, when will they vote on the bill and eventually get it to President Trump's desk? I think the latest that could potentially happen would be a week from today. I could see a scenario where you get all the ducks in a row and they vote on it perhaps as early as Friday. The House votes on it as early as Friday, but maybe it extends into the weekend. You know, there's always the possibility that there could be members of the House, particularly conservative Republicans, who hate governing this way, they hate budgeting this way, they hate appropriating this way, who may raise a stink about how this whole process played itself out. But ultimately, that faction generally gets in line behind President Trump. So let's say they get this voted on by the end of next week and the government's reopened. That doesn't mean we snap a finger and everything goes back to normal. It takes time for the funding to start getting into the bank accounts of the various state agencies that will fund them. So SNAP benefit recipients, it's not as if the gavel goes down, the president signs the bill, and all of a sudden that money is in your bank account. It doesn't happen that quickly. So it depends on which state you live in as to whether or not your benefits will come right away. Some states have already been filling the gap, so there would be no interruption there. Like, for instance, in Virginia, they've created a program where the state has used emergency funds to try and fill that gap. So there's still going to be some anxiety for a lot of SNAP benefit recipients. And the same goes for federal workers who have gone for so long without funding. You know, it will take time. It's not as if the direct deposit will hit their bank account the second the president signs it into law. And it will probably vary on the agency how quickly they get that in. And then in terms of the damage that it's done to the FAA and the damage that it's done to air travel, you know, even though these workers who have gone so long, TSA officers and air traffic controllers who have gone all this time working without pay, even though they'll start to get that pay, there's still the lingering effect of what they've had to go through over these, 5 or 6 weeks, having to deal with this, the fatigue connected to it, the fact that they've been under such stress. So it could take some time for this all to get back to normal, because a lot of damage has been done over the course of this shutdown.
We're hearing from some senators right now, Ryan, following their vote to pass the bill, paving the way for the government to reopen. Let's listen in. All right, Ryan, sorry about that. We actually don't have that sound, but I do want to ask you, what do you think was really the tipping point to getting senators back to Capitol Hill tonight to take this vote? Was it the concern about people going hungry? Was it the angst and the anger at the airports? Or was it their very own government workers saying, we cannot take this anymore?
I think it was a combination of all of the above. You know, we've known from the very beginning that there was a group of, 8 to 12 senators, Democratic senators, who abhorred the idea of using the shutdown as a vehicle for leverage to get a policy goal. We saw that play out
moment. But just to recap tonight, the Senate taking the first step toward reopening the government after a record-long shutdown, 40 days, the longest the U.S. has ever seen in terms of a government shutdown. This was a procedural vote, which means there will be more votes to come. The bill not doing everything that Democrats had hoped. The Affordable Care Act is still very much in the air, but what it does do is fund SNAP benefits. Those are those food stamps, the EBT cards that people use to buy their groceries through the end of next year. This bill would also fund the government only through January 30th. So even if the House does come back and vote this week to extend the government payments, we still may be in this very same spot come the end of January. We'll have much more coverage online at NBCNews.com and, of course, tomorrow morning on Today. I'm Jessica Layton. Thanks for watching.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.